Hi, I'm Johnny Jemison, and I'm a visual storyteller. I'm working on drawing my first book right now, and we're going to walk through some of the steps that it takes to draw one of the pages. You don't necessarily have to script out a comic strip or a shorter story, 1 or 2 pages. You can just draw those out in thumbnail stage. But if you're drawing a larger story like I am, like 160 pages, then it's a good idea to get your script in line. But I always try to include a lot of visual details in my script. You include moments of character motivation so that I know how to draw the characters and their acting. And if I have a visual idea of how I want the page layout, I'll probably go ahead and draw that out as a thumbnail page in the process of writing the script. It's like writing anything else. Your first draft will be just whatever you toss down on the page. But as you get into like your second or third draft, things will start to become a little bit more clear and scenes will start to come out, specific scenes. And I try to look for those scenes as early on as possible because I found one of the keys to the stories that I love is each scene sets up an idea and concludes that idea. So you have sort of like a complete thought going on throughout that scene, but it still leaves enough open thoughts going on to lead you into the next scene. We want to try to construct the comic as visually as possible. And even whenever I'm scripting with words, I try to think visually and include visual reference, and I'll draft up a quick thumbnail for a page if I need to. But if I'm doing something shorter like a comic strip, I won't even bother with the script. Just go in and draw it and try to set the stage because it is a visual medium. And one of the major keys to drawing comics is staging out your panels, because you'll find that some comics are just non-stop action, one page after another, but then others take their time and break down the action very slowly, and they're able to get a little bit more tension or a little bit more humor. The really effective ones are able to speed up and slow down, and if you can get that pacing down, it creates a very effective comic story. Yeah, there is a lot of cinematography that goes into it, ideas of staging the camera lower or higher, placing the characters in different parts of the scene, not just to create an effect for the story, but also to create a visual effect so that there's a flow not only within a single panel, but there's a flow between the panels on a single page. And I try to be very conscious of like where your eye is led, because if you can create a page where your eye is led on a certain path through a panel and then led directly from one panel to another, not just because of where the panels are, but because of the things in those panels sort of leading your eye through the page. Penciling always happens like this. You draw your panels first, then your dialogue, then you draw the balloons around the dialogue, and then everything else. Penciling's the really fun part because you get to just make stuff. As opposed to storytelling, you try to be very conscious about what's going where and how do I make this scene work. But penciling, you just get to take all the things that you have so far and just put them together on a page. You're not really making up anything fresh. You have the story that you've already written, and all the things that you're drawing, you have a vocabulary that you've built just from looking at the things around you, looking at the way different cartoonists draw, different visual artists in general have different ways of drawing things. And the most important part of penciling is when you're not penciling, take things in and look at the way that other artists work, and you're creating that vocabulary that you can draw from whenever it is time to draw. A lot of your inking is going to depend on what kind of comic you're making. So since I tend to work more in black and white, I focus a lot on line and silhouette. I'll have a lot of areas filled in with black. I'll do little hatching and stippling to indicate shadows and stuff. Whereas if this is going to be a colorful children's comic, you might want to just trace over your lines with thin ink lines, and then a lot of the bright colors will delineate between different things within a scene, and colors will determine shadow, whereas I'm very clear about my shadows with either hatching or just filling in with black. So it's gonna make a huge impact on your comic, but it's very specific to what kind of comic you're making. It's addictive. I've heard a lot of the other cartoonists that I follow say the same thing, that they started drawing one webcomic and that wasn't enough, so they started drawing 2 webcomics, and then they wound up in the graphic novel industry, and you find that the more you do it, the more you want it. It's a great way of telling a story visually in a way that you can just do in your spare time. You don't have to get a bunch of people together like you would for a movie and plan out all the logistics of how to make it happen. You just plot out the story the way a novelist would, and then draw it up on paper.